So, picture this. A top-tier politician, a guy once tipped to be a future leader of the UK's Conservative Party, just suddenly jumped ship to join his biggest rival. Well, that's not hypothetical. It just happened. And in this explainer, we're going to break down the absolutely shocking press conference where Robert Jenrick, a major figure in the Conservative shadow cabinet, announced he was joining Nigel Farage's Reform UK.
And right from the get-go, the press conference kicked off with this stunner of a claim. Those are the words of Reform UK's leader, Nigel Farage. But get this, he wasn't thanking his new ally. No, he was sarcastically thanking the Conservative Party. He was essentially saying, "You guys messed up so badly, you just handed me this massive political win on a silver platter."
So, how on earth did we get to this point? Well, it turns out the backstory to this whole announcement is almost as dramatic as the news itself. What's really fascinating here is that this whole thing apparently wasn't supposed to go down like this. According to Farage, they were still in the middle of negotiations with Jenrick. But then, there was a leak. This forced the Conservative Party's hand and they expelled him. Farage claims they jumped the gun, which basically blew up the negotiations and forced them to call this last-minute press conference. In his view, his rivals played right into his hands.
Okay, but why? Why would Jenrick make such a huge, career-altering move? Well, his entire case, his whole argument, starts with a really stark and honestly pretty bleak diagnosis of the state of the UK today.
He kicked things off with this powerful claim, aimed right at the heart of the country's future. The idea that for the first time ever, the younger generation is actually on track to be poorer than their parents. For him, that's a sign that a fundamental social contract has been broken. And believe me, he did not stop there. He then just rattled off this whole series of pretty startling statistics to back up his claim. We're talking flat wages, house prices through the roof, the highest debt and tax levels in generations, you name it. The picture he painted was that by almost any important measure, the country is going backwards. And his critique wasn't just about the money. Not at all. Jenrick also talked about what he sees as a breakdown of law and order. And he used this incredible statistic to make his point, that a staggering 93% of all reported crimes in the country just go unresolved. Then he turned his attention to the workforce. He claimed that a full 1 out of every 5 working-age Britons isn't actually working. They're economically inactive. And he presented this as yet another symptom of some really deep-seated national problems. He also went after public services. And just take a look at this chart. He pointed out that the number of people waiting over 4 hours in hospital A&E departments has shot up 8-fold since 2012. For Jenrick, this is just another glaring sign of a system that's completely overwhelmed. So after laying out all of this evidence piece by piece, Jenrick wrapped up his diagnosis with this single, defiant challenge to anyone listening.
All right, so if Britain is broken, who's to blame? Well, Jenrick has an answer for that, and he's pointing the finger at the entire political establishment. See, Jenrick argues that the blame here falls on both of the big political parties. He says they're just two sides of the same failed coin. On the issue of migration, for instance, he claims Labour might have started it, but his own Conservative Party, they're the ones who ramped it up. Then he shared this really personal story from his time as a government minister. He described being in a cabinet meeting to sign off on a plan to stop illegal immigration, and he claims that every single person in that room knew deep down that the policy was a complete dud. And that meeting, he says, was the turning point. It was the moment he knew he had to go. He walked out of there and decided to resign from the government, framing it as a stand he had to take on principle against a policy he felt was just knowingly deceiving the public. And he told another pretty damning story from inside his own party. He talked about a recent shadow cabinet meeting. That's the top team of the opposition, where someone asked, "Is Britain broken?" And according to Jenrick, most of them just stuck to the party line and said no, while a few others admitted privately, yeah, it is, but we can't say that out loud. For him, this was just proof that the party was living in a state of denial. So we've had the diagnosis, and we've had the blame game. Now for the prescription. If the old parties are the problem, Jenrick's argument is that the only real solution has to be something completely new. So how does Jenrick square teaming up with a figure as controversial as Nigel Farage? Well, his justification is that for years, while the entire political establishment was getting it wrong, Farage was often the lone voice of common sense on the big issues. He argues that mainstream politics is only now, finally, catching up to where Farage has been all along. The big vision that he and Farage laid out is for Reform UK to be something more than just another political party. They're talking about building a national movement, bringing in people from business, from healthcare, from the military, experts from outside the political bubble, to come in and fix what they see as a totally broken system.
Of course, when you make a move this dramatic, the tough questions are going to come thick and fast. So let's take a look at how Jenrick and Farage handled the immediate grilling they got from the media.
First up, the most predictable, most obvious charge, especially from his former colleagues, was this just a spectacular act of treachery, abandoning the very party that built his career just months before an election?
Jenrick's answer was basically to flip the whole question on its head. He argued that this isn't about loyalty to a party, it's about loyalty to the country. He claimed his first duty is to Britain, and that staying silent in a party he believes is failing would have been the real betrayal. But what about Reform UK itself? The critics immediately piped up, asking if the party is just turning into a lifeboat for politicians from the same conservative government that Jenrick himself says broke Britain in the first place.
Farage's response to that was just pure defiance. He basically declared that reform isn't here to prop up the conservatives, they're here to replace them. And then he made this incredibly bold, almost jaw-dropping prediction, that after the next election, the Conservative Party will cease to be a national political party. A huge claim.
And all of that leaves us with the million-dollar question, doesn't it? Is this the beginning of some historic realignment of British politics like they claim? Or is it just a massive, high-stakes gamble that could totally backfire, split their own side's vote, and accidentally hand a huge victory to their opponents? They've made their case. Now, we all have to wait and see what happens next.